Hello. I'd like to spend a few minutes reviewing the proud history of the United States Air Force in New Mexico and our contributions to the nation and world. We start in 1916 with New Mexico's introduction to military aviation. The Signal Corps' first Aero Squadron arrived with 8 Curtiss JN-3 biplanes for Brigadier General Pershing's punitive expedition against Pancho Villa. By the 1930s, New Mexico civil airports had become popular refueling and maintenance stops for military aviators crossing the country. Soon, it became an important player in the Army Air Corps training. Now, I'd like to cover individual bases and the parts they played. Kirtland Air Force Base supports over 100 associate units, employs over 20,000 people, covers over 52,000 acres, and contributes billions of dollars to the local economy. Kirtland started in the 1920s as a private airfield, then a municipal airport, and then an Army Air Corps training field. By 1941, it officially opened as an Army air base commanded by Colonel Frank D. Hackett, with its first B-18 bomber. Later that year, it received the 19th Bombardment Group, over 2,000 trainees for the new B-17. The 19th then deployed to the Philippines and South Pacific, where many crew members were decorated for bravery. 1 week after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Colonel Hackett established the first wartime advanced flying school, with graduates seeing action in various World War II theaters of operation. In 1942, it was renamed in honor of Colonel Roy C. Kirtland, who was one of the first students to fly with the Wright brothers. Kirtland now had 50 AT-11s and 28 B-18s. During World War II, the base's schools trained almost 8,000 bombardiers and pilots. Kirtland hosted the second most important scientific project of World War II, the variable time proximity fuse.
Once in flight, the fuse sends out radio waves, which are its feelers, continually probing the space around the shell in search of a suitable target. When the shell passes close to a target, such as an airplane, the radio waves are reflected back to the fuse, where they trigger a firing circuit and explode the projectile. The same system may be applied to targets on the ground.
The VT fuse is credited in 2 destroyers standing off 156 enemy planes during the siege of Okinawa, turning the Battle of the Bulge to the Allies' favor, and was highly praised by General George S. Patton, Jr. Kirtland trained combat crews for the B-29, which decisively ended the war with Japan using atomic weapons. The nuclear age had begun. The base hosted flight test activities for the Manhattan Engineering District, developing aircraft modifications for nuclear weapons delivery and determining ballistic characteristics. It is now 1947. The United States Air Force was born, and the newly named Kirtland Air Force Base joined its proud ranks. The Armed Forces Special Weapons Project, now Defense Threat Reduction Agency, began to provide support in matters concerning nuclear weapons, effects, and testing. Kirtland hosted the B-36, the world's largest bomber, and then the B-47 jet bomber. By 1949, Kirtland's Special Weapons Command was created to determine future employment of nuclear weapons. In the 1950s, experiments were conducted including biophysicists deliberately flying through nuclear clouds to determine radiation hazards, researching high-altitude nuclear explosions, the nature of the Van Allen radiation belts around the Earth. In the 1970s, the Trestle Electromagnetic Pulse Simulator was built. It is the largest wood and glue laminated structure in the world. Aircraft and equipment tested here were subjected with up to 10 million volts of electricity to simulate the effects of a nuclear explosion and assess hardness to the electromagnetic pulse generated by a nuclear burst. In 1982, Kirtland became a focal point for developing and managing Air Force space-related science and technology.
Our congratulations to the Mighty Sat team at Kirtland Air Force Base, the Phillips Lab, and Goddard Space Flight Center, and the United States Air Force.
The former Walker Air Force Base started as Roswell Army Airfield in 1941, hosting a military flying training center and a bombardier school. The Strategic Air Command was given the responsibility of delivering the atomic bomb. Only Roswell's 509th Wing was trained and ready for this mission. Roswell and Kirtland were the key bases in this effort. B-29s from the 509th Wing delivered the first special weapon on Japan. In 1947, it was renamed in honor of Brigadier General Kenneth N. Walker, who co-authored the air campaign strategy used in defeating Germany during World War II. Walker's Atlas lift silos became operational 1 month before the Cuban Missile Crisis.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba.
The Atlas and Titan missile sites were operational until 1965. Cannon Air Force Base near Clovis began in the 1920s as a port air terminal for early commercial transcontinental flights, flying passengers by day in the Ford Tri-Motor, nicknamed Tin Goose, and using Pullman trains for night travel. In World War II, Clovis Army Airfield hosted a glider detachment, training units for heavy bombers, gunnery, and photographic reconnaissance. In 1957, it was renamed in honor of General John Kenneth Cannon, who commanded all the air operations for the invasion of southern Europe in 1944. Various fighter-bomber wings flying P-51 Mustang and F-86 Sabres were hosted at Cannon. In the 1960s, Cannon hosted F-100 Super Sabres, deploying in support of operations concerning Formosa, Berlin, Cuba, Thailand, and Vietnam. Over the next several decades, it hosted F-111s, AT-33s, and F-16s. Cannon also maintained its EF-111 mission as the only Raven unit in the Air Force and supported Operation Southern Watch in Iraq. In 1998, Cannon saw the activation of a hybrid United States and Republic of Singapore F-16 squadron named Peace Carbon 3. It hosted training of personnel in rapid deployment and tactical employment of the F-16 throughout a wide spectrum of missions. Holloman, near Alamogordo, covers 60,000 acres of land and has over 5,000 personnel. Holloman hosts the F-117 Stealth and our top air-to-air weapon, the F-15 Eagle. It also has 380 members of the German Air Force's Tactical Training Center with F-4F Phantom IIs and Tornadoes. Holloman started as the Alamogordo Army Airfield in 1942 to train British aircrews. After Pearl Harbor, the British canceled its overseas training program. Plus, the United States needed to train its own growing military. During World War II, Alamogordo Army Airfield trained over 20 bomber groups who served in nearly every major combat operations in Italy, France, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and the Balkans. In 1948, it was renamed in honor of Colonel George Vernon Holloman, aviation instrument inventor, early guided missile experimenter, and conductor of the first instrument-only aircraft landing. These and other research programs were conducted at Holloman. In 1954, Lieutenant Colonel Stapp broke records as the fastest man alive at 632 miles per hour on the rocket-propelled test sled named Sonic Wind No. 1. And then, in 1960, 4 world records were broken when Captain Joseph Kivington Jr. jumped from a balloon at over 100,000 feet to evaluate techniques of high-altitude bailout. The jump lasted 13 minutes and hit 614 miles per hour.
1, 0, ignition.
Now, the space race was on. As final safety tests, Holloman trained chimpanzees, Enos and Ham, who blasted off and flew in separate Mercury missions. Both were safely recovered.
0, fire.
Currently, Holloman's test track is the world's longest, over 50,000 feet, and fastest. Its test capabilities include After a century of flight and 60 years of air and space power, New Mexico is proud of its humanitarian, defense, and research contributions to the nation and the world. As the U.S. Air Force soars into the new millennium, the sky is no longer the limit. God bless the United States of America.